Okay. So the first day of lecture, what? I mean, as far as section 1 goes, kind of the themes I just touched on briefly yesterday. No, you do not necessarily need your book today. But I did want to get started. And I want to start with a quote. And who better to quote?
Hey, don't touch.
George
Washington.
How about Winston Churchill?
Not as good as George Washington.
Churchill said this. He said, democracy is the worst form of government ever contrived by man, except for all the rest. Basically what he's saying is that democracy, guys, is messy. It is sometimes frustrating. Okay? But based on all, that we've been through as mankind and different governments that we've tried, this is the best. Okay? And our goal with this class, in the first part of this class, is to understand why. Okay? Why democracy? Okay? And why the system of government we have. Now, as you guys know, we live in a democracy, right?
No. Yes.
No, we live in a republic.
Democratic Republic.
Yes. We have democratic principles, but we live in a republic. Okay? And there's a big difference. All right? And we've got to understand that. And I think the level of civics education in our public schools in this day and age is so bad that most Americans don't know the simple difference between a republic and democracy. And that is sad. Now, for your sake, guys, we're going way above and beyond that simple message, okay? So just understanding that basic premise is good, but we've got to go a lot deeper than that. Yeah?
So a republic's not a kind of democracy?
Republicans tend to be democratic in nature. So your basic direct democracy is where everyone gets to participate in every decision. That's democracy. Okay? And our founders were afraid of that. Many of our founders referred to it as a mobocracy. If you look at the French Revolution, for instance, do you know much about the French Revolution and how violent it was? This is an attempt, and we'll look at guys like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who perpetuated these ideas of true democracy.
Max Robespierre.
As well, others. In a sense, Marxism is built around this idea of the general will of the people, which means that the majority in a democratic system gets to decide for everybody else. Okay? Now, we elect people to do this for us, and that's what a republic is. So we're not relying on the average citizen to be knowledgeable about all of the affairs of public policy that our representatives are supposed to be knowledgeable about, so that they can make good decisions for us. And there's your big difference. Okay? Correct. Okay, so let's start with a basic definition of government. Okay? Section 1, government. Are you ready?
Yes.
Government, an institution through which society makes and enforces public policy. An institution through which a society makes and enforces public policy. Government. It's an institution. Okay? Now, what is public policy?
The public's policy.
Well, public, you should think of government. Okay, like public schools, right? So what is public policy?
Public, like way people scrutinize people.
It's all things that government does is public policy. Write that down. Public policy. All things that government does. And an example of public policy would be what?
Tax reform.
Okay, tax reform, which could be what we would call a new what?
Tax code.
Law. Laws are public policies. Okay? Now, the government doesn't just use laws for public policy. There's other things that would include public policy. Okay? All right, so with the government, usually governments are found within a state. Okay? A state. Now, how could we define a state?
A body unified under a government or by boundaries.
Okay. How about a geographically, politically organized unit?
Geopolitical unit.
A geopolitical unit works for me. Okay? So a government is going to rule over a state, which you need geography. Better yet, what we could do is come up with 4 characteristics of the state. How many characteristics of the state?
4.
4 characteristics of the state. Okay? Now, is a state different than a nation? We live in the United States of America.
Normally, no.
A state and a nation can be the same thing?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, a nation state. Okay, now we have 50 state governments under one federal government,
Which is a state.
which is the United States, which is a nation,
Which is a state.
which is a state. It is confusing. Sometimes you'll hear Israel referred to as the state of Israel. Okay? So, yes, the two terms state and nation are interchangeable, which does confuse people. Okay? Do you know how many states there are in Mexico?
32.
We know there are 50 in the U.S. Is there 32?
No.
Are you guessing?
No.
There's like,
It's
You guys know?
not nearly as many.
Teens or 20s.
I don't know.
I think there's like a few.
It's singles.
There are a few of those things lying around.
I don't know. Okay. Braden's going to look it up, but don't take too long because we got to talk about these 4 characteristics. Number 1, what do you got to have? You got to have people. You got to have population.
Made up of people.
Yeah, you got to have people. Now, you don't need to know this for the test or anything, but you guys know the largest populated nation state, right? China. 31 Mexican states.
That's so close.
That's pretty good. That's a good guess. All right, China has 1.3 billion people. Do you know the second largest?
India.
India. Now, here's where it gets tricky. What about number 3? No. No.
It's
Brazil.
No.
it's not Bangladesh.
No.
Australia.
Iceland.
No. No.
Greenland.
No.
Malaysia.
No. You're done.
Madagascar.
Indonesia is the 3rd largest state in the world. And it is also the largest Muslim country in the world.
Australia.
Are they Asian or are they?
I would refer to them as Asian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those Asians like to populate. Quite
Well, I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with the
Culture.
temperature. It's climate. Okay? Number 2, the second characteristic of a state is territory. Oh, by the way, what's the smallest populated state?
Madagascar.
Vatican City.
No. No.
Whoa,
No.
whoa.
I don't know about that.
826 last count.
Oh wait, really? That's
Yeah.
small.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
small states out there, but I've never heard of them.
Yeah. There's a country called Tuvalu that has 12,000 people. Nauru, which is a Pacific island, has 10,000.
Svalbard's got
Monaco has 32,000. Now, territory. Okay, you got to have territory. What's the smallest territory?
What?
country that has the smallest territory?
Ooh.
Vatican City.
Vatican City. Okay. Largest? Russia. Okay. Now, when it was the Soviet Union, it was a lot bigger.
And it will be again, Mr. Reed.
Yes.
The people will rise.
Collusion. Okay. The third characteristic of a state. You got population, territory. The third is sovereignty. Let me spell that for you. SOVEREIGNTY. Sovereignty is a characteristic of a state. Now, sovereignty can be used in different contexts. So, like when you're 16 years old, you guys know you can get up and walk out of this classroom and drop out of school legally. You are sovereign in that manner. When you're 18, you're so sovereign that you can go out and buy cigarettes and tobacco. Okay? But really, you don't truly become sovereign in this country until you're 21. Okay? But when you're 18, I mean, that obviously you become more sovereign.
No, you don't truly become sovereign until you're 35 when you can run for.
For president? Okay. All right. Yeah, so sovereignty can be used in that context. The right to rule, okay, is the term we're looking here. Characteristics of a state is that there is sovereignty, that the people there have the right to rule over that territory, or there's a group that rules over that territory. They have power, absolute power over that territory. Okay? And then the fourth characteristic of a state is government. Government.
Doesn't government and sovereignty kind of go hand in hand?
They all kind of go hand in hand. Okay?
Yes. So can
Which-
we call this classroom a state?
No. I could call it a government, but not a state. I don't think so. I mean, for an hour, 40 minutes, 50 minutes a day, it kind of is, but it's not perpetually because different people use it. It's not the same people every hour. It's not the same teacher every hour.
Maybe we should do that with the world.
Nomadic. Well, that brings up a good point because we want to look at the origins of a state. We're going to look at 4 different origins of the state. And so we're going back in human history.
The Bolshevik Revolution.
Oh, way further back than that. Go way back.
To the
Right?
ancient Phoenicians.
And we are going to look at how different forms of, how states come into being. Okay? And the first origin of the state is the force theory. Like the force is with you. The force theory. Got that?
Tribal force.
So guys, listen, on my tests, sometimes there's going to be questions like, can you name 2 origins of a state? Okay? List 4 characteristics of a state. You understand what I'm saying? Okay, so these are things you need to write down and learn and memorize. Okay? Force theory is where one person or group of people force other people to submit to their power. Where one group of people or one person force another group of people to submit to their power. Okay? Think Genghis Khan. The Vikings. Now, in order to create a state, this force theory, you're going to have to no longer be nomadic, right? You're going to have to stay in one place.
Can we? Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Electricity. We're waiting.
Go.
Maybe I'll just talk to you about it after class.
How about
You're not saying that this theory is the correct.
No. But we're looking at human history at the origins of different states and how they come into being.
Okay.
And this is one of those ways that states historically have come into being.
Okay.
Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you've studied world history. When different groups move into an area and make other people submit to them. And it becomes basically a politically organized unit by force.
But then you have Africa, which is like shamanism. Like there.
We're on number 1. So let's see if number 2 covers what you're thinking, my friend.
Yeah, guy.
Number 2, the second origin of the state is called the evolutionary theory. Evolutionary. Now, this is where you start with a family. It grows into a clan. The clan grows into a tribe. Okay? And that tribe settles in a certain place. And we have a new state. An origin of a state. It evolves. Is that kind of marching up the tree you're talking about?
Not quite.
Okay, let's try the next one.
It's getting closer.
This one you're all familiar with, and you've studied in world history and probably your English classes as well, your literature classes, and that is the divine right theory.
There we go. Now we're hitting it.
The divine right theory says that God gives certain people the right to rule over others. And this is where we get into this idea of, when we talk about all the kings and queens of Europe and so forth, emperors in Japan, dynasties in China, and so forth, is the idea of a divine right to rule.
The holy mandate.
Now, there is some biblical precedent for this. Is there a point in time where we can actually say, yes, God did appoint somebody to rule? David. Right? Because the Jews asked for God to send them a king. And he had a divine right. Now, I'm not sure about Queen Elizabeth or King Henry VIII or King Louis XIV. Do these people actually have a divine right from God to rule, or are they just saying that?
They said they did, so it must be true.
Are you buying it?
If they're selling it.
Mr. Ebright, this goes back centuries.
Centuries.
There were tribes that claimed that their religious leaders had the right to
Yeah.
rule because they knew most about that.
Right. Well, guys, there's going to be a time when man says, you know what? I don't believe you. I don't believe you have a divine right to rule. And so, the fourth origin of government, origin of the state, okay, is the social contract theory. This, of course, is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time, with the social contract theory, okay? And that is where government is an agreement. Government is an agreement between the governed and the government, or between the government and the governed. It's an agreement. Social contract. Now, these ideas were not just launched, in the 17th century, which is kind of where we're going to begin our study, but people have thought about this before, obviously. And I have a quote from Socrates. Socrates, who was put in jail, said this about being in jail. He said, I need to stay in jail, okay? And this is based on the idea that my entire way of life is based upon laws. And by benefiting from those laws and agreeing to live there, I'm agreeing to the punishment set out by those laws. I've entered into a contract with the government, and I have to keep my part. That's what Socrates said. Now, that was long before Locke and Hobbes and Rousseau and
There we go.
others. Okay? Socrates is thinking about this. Obviously, we think of Socrates as a great thinker, right? So this theory, the social contract theory, is not new, but in the 17th century, it is going to become challenged. It's going to begin to challenge the divine right theory, which is going to cause some problems for those who claim divine right to rule. Yes? So, in your book, and I'm not going to sign this tonight or tomorrow night or over the weekend because of our marchers, okay? And I want them to be able to read this and discuss this. So Monday I will be assigning the reading in the book on Locke, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. There is an assignment in there. So there's going to be 2 chances for points here as a class. Okay, you're going to have, there's 5 questions on the second treatise of civil government by John Locke. There's 5 questions there. I'll give you 2 points each for answering those. And then participation for the class as far as the discussion goes about these different social contract theories. The better the discussion, the more points we'll get as a class. Now, this is something that can be deep and interesting because what these men are talking about is human nature. What form of government suits mankind best? And guys, we are all flawed as human beings, yes? Right? Even me. I have flaws. Okay? So, what type of government do we need to control me? Or better yet, to control Brady.
Sounding very Hobbesian.
Well, we'll see. All right, so Tristan, you've studied this a little bit before?
Yes.
At Collegiate?
No.
Okay.
Wow, I'm surprised.
How about that?
Where did you study this, on your own? It is very interesting stuff. And I hope to challenge your thoughts a little bit and bring more enlightenment to you. But feel free to share your enlightenment with us when we discuss it.
But not yet.
But not yet, because we don't want to leave these people behind. Yes? And by the way, first hour is going to be watching this lecture tomorrow morning. And you guys are going to be watching a John Stossel video. Now, they watched Communism versus Capitalism. They said it wasn't very good, so I picked out a different one for you. It's a surprise.
Can we just find a video that just talks about anything bad about something? Just do an hour-long rant.
What about the origin of
Well, I can do that.
power?
All right.
We need to talk about that.
All right. Now, it's more social than that. Okay. So, we will do an in-depth discussion on social contract, different social contract theories. Okay? But for now, we're going to move on and look at different forms of government. Different forms of government. So skip a couple, 3 or 4 lines in your notes, and let's talk about different forms of government.
Are we coming back to this?
Yeah, we're going to come back to it and discuss it. And you're actually going to write a little bit about it on the test as well. So I'll make sure you have the information you need. But we're moving on to different forms of government. Now, what's going to be confusing, guys, is that we're looking at different forms of government based on different criteria. So the first criteria we're going to use is different forms of government based upon, you ready? Geographic distribution of power. Different forms of government based upon geographic distribution of power. Where does the power lie geographically with the government? Okay, there's 3 different types of governments we're going to talk about. And the first is the most common type of geographic distribution of power that most countries on the planet use. And that is called the unitary system. The unitary system. And what it looks like is this. This is your central government or national government. This is your state, local, or regional government. So in a unitary system, where does the power lie?
Central mostly.
At the national level, at the central government level, okay? That's where the power is. Most countries use this. Now, the United States is trending towards a unitary system where more and more decisions are made with the central government, Washington, D.C., than is with the state and local governments. Okay? I think you guys know that, right? We're trending here, but this is not where we are. Now, Britain, France, many European countries, Asian countries, Japan uses this unitary system where most of the power is held, most of the decisions are made at the national level and directed to the local level. In some cases, you know, what's the highest elected office in Wichita, Kansas? The mayor, okay? So in a unitary system, what you might find is that the mayor at this level is actually a government employee from the national government sent to that location to administer government. Not elected locally or having any real power locally. It's all directed by employees of the central system.
But in our case,
We're not to our place yet. Okay, we'll get to our place. Just let's understand unitary first. Yes. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay? So the second system of government, based on geographic distribution of power, is one that we used to have.
Confederacy.
Yes, a confederal.
Confederate States of America.
A confederal system of government. In this situation, it looks more like this. This is your national government or central government, and this is your state and local or regional governments, where all the power lies at the state and local level. Now, the first Constitution of the United States was called the Articles of Confederation. And they gave very little power to the national government. Why?
The people could choose.
Tyranny. They were afraid of tyranny. Where does tyranny come from? It comes from a strong central power, okay, that is overbearing. And that's what we came from with the British and the king. Okay? And so we're rejecting the unitary system in a big way by creating a confederal system. Now, there are still confederacies around the globe. A good example of one is called the European Union. Independent states joining together for common goals. I mean, that's what we did. The 13 states joined together for a common goal of what?
Wait a minute. But our
Freedom.
Our European Union, or the European Union, is
It is a confederacy.
more bureaucratic, though.
Well, of course it is.
You can't elect them.
The idea of the Confederacy.
Okay, so the confederacy. Stay on task. Okay. Canada has a confederacy. Russia is a confederacy today. Okay? But it's not truly. I mean, it's like a mob
I thought it was
or a
Soviet
mafia
Socialist.
state is what Russia is today. But
Oligarchy.
yeah. So it didn't work for us, guys. We really restricted the power of the national government, and we're going to talk about this in class, but we'll get into the details of it. It didn't function well because they really had almost no power with the Articles of Confederation. Okay, so the third type of system or system of government based on geographical distribution of power is federalism. And it, when designed, for the United States anyways, was supposed to look something like this. Let me define federalism for you. And write this down. And when you write this down, I wouldn't mind if you wrote it down in all caps. I wouldn't mind if you underlined it. I wouldn't mind if you put a star next to it or got a highlighter out and highlighted it. Because I'm going to give you a definition of federalism and I want you to memorize it. And I want you to remember it. And I will. At any given day, on any given time, I'll stop you in the hallway. I'll call you on the phone after you graduate. And I'm going to ask you to define federalism. And you better remember it.
I think the first question is like, where did you get my phone number this week, right?
Oh,
The buzz book.
From the government.
I have people.
What?
Now,
That's weird.
Jack, I know your sister. I just call your sister.
I feel it.
You have Sophie's number?
Yeah. Also,
I
why
could
do you
check
have
my
sister's
phone, but it's
phone
being
number?
used.
Why do you have my sister's phone number?
Because she was a manager for my
She
baseball
was.
team. Okay?
What?
Now,
We'll tell you when you're on.
federalism. Are you ready?
Yep.
The sharing or division of power between national, state, and local governments. Hamlin,
Yes.
define federalism.
The sharing or division of power between national, state, and local governments.
Very good. You just got 2 points right on the test. Okay? Monday. Be ready. I'm going to call on somebody. Be ready. Okay. Now, is this an equal sharing?
No.
No. There is what's called federal supremacy. Okay, there's a clause in the Constitution we'll talk about called the Supremacy Clause in Article 4 of the Constitution. Okay. However, when you think of federalism, guys, all right, think for me some local governments. What do we do locally in this country?
We established parks, mall parks.
Okay, so you have like Parks and Recs, right?
Yeah. The Wichita bus system.
Okay, buses. What else?
Transportation.
Put fluoride in the water.
So say Wichita, fill in the blank. Wichita. Okay.
Public health.
Public schools, guys, schools.
But schools are
You-
federally funded.
USD 259, USD 266. Those are local governments, unified school districts. That's a government. And there's school boards that are elected. It's a local government.
Oh, the school boards.
What else? Wichita Police Department,
Fire department.
Fire Department, Sedgwick County.
Even
Bomb
sheriff.
squad.
Okay.
I mean, we do have a bomb squad.
Okay. What about the court system? Okay, you have the municipal courts, you have county courts. Okay, courts. These are all local. Okay, libraries. These are things that affect the daily lives of Americans every day.
Taxes.
Okay, now what about state government? What does the state do?
State police.
National state
I mean, we do have Kansas State troopers.
Kansas?
Department of Transportation.
That's a big part of it.
Business subsidies.
licenses.
Education. These are the two biggest things Kansas does. You do have the KBI, right?
Kansas business.
The state troopers,
Oh wait.
Bureau of Investigation. Yes.
Is the state directly in charge of county laws?
No.
In between, is there like a committee that meets for stuff like that?
For county, you have county commissioners.
Don't we have a business bureau?
Yeah, I mean, we have lots of little state departments and stuff, you know. Okay. Now, So as you guys can see here, if left to our own devices, state and local governments can control most of the important things that affect our daily lives: transportation, education, safety, these sorts of things. Okay, so this is the way our system was devised. Now, federalism has turned into, and has been since we wrote the new Constitution, a tug of war. A tug of war between that national level and the state and local levels about who's going to decide what you're eating at lunch today.
And we're losing the war.
And there are times in American history where the state and local governments are losing that tug of war. And then there are times when they win. Guys, we're going to do a whole day. I'll do a whole day, maybe a day and a half on federalism. It is something that is very important to me because most Americans don't even know what it frickin' means. I want you to go home and ask mom or dad, can you tell me what federalism means? I mean, if you don't know what it is and know that these things are reserved for the states and local governments, if the national government becomes stronger and more unitary and takes away these decisions from us at the local level and makes those decisions here, we become a unitary system. If you don't know federalism exists, then how do you know when they take it away from you? You don't. And if we dumb down our education system enough and don't teach civics and the reasons why we have federalism, which I will get into, then people don't care. People don't know. It's silly. And that's why I want you to memorize what it means and never forget it. Because every day in this country, the national government is trying to take more and more from this. What was the Civil War fought over?
States' rights.
Slavery.
States'
The
rights.
state's rights to have slavery.
Who gets to make the decision? Federalism. Okay? Now, guys, there is an important role for the federal government. This is something that it's taken us, a couple centuries to kind of figure out. We've got to have that umbrella. And again, when you talk about slavery, guys, you're talking about human rights. You're talking about civil rights. And at some point, one group of people's right and one group of people's wrong. And if it takes the federal government to abuse states' rights in order to save people's lives and their human rights, then sorry, it had to happen. The federal government had to do it. The national government had to say to the states, you're wrong, and we have to protect these human beings because you are not treating them as human beings.
Why don't we add another box there?
What's the box?
Individual.
You could, I guess. But the individuals make up the whole.
Right. Sounds like collectivist speak. And that collectivist
Oh, stop it.
is communism. Sounds like federalism is communism.
All right. So good. You guys understand 3 different systems, and it's proper more to say systems when you're talking about federalism, confederal, and unitary systems, okay? But different forms of government based on geographic distribution of power, okay? That's the first set we're looking at. The second set we're going to look at, and I don't know how much time I got.
We have enough.
Well, here's the thing. First hour is shorter. We are at 39 minutes. So let me just introduce this, and then we'll pick this up on Monday, okay? The second, when we're looking at different forms of government based on different criteria, the second criteria we're going to use is the number of people that can participate in government. So different forms of government based on the number of people that can participate. Smitty, you got to get that down.
Only white property.
You got to write that down.
males.
We're looking at different forms of government based on the number of people that can participate. So you can probably figure out where we're going with this. Like dictatorships versus democracy, okay? So that's where we're going to go with this. And we're going to look at different forms of dictatorship on Monday, and we're going to look at different forms of democracy on Monday. Good? Okay, I know this might not be the most exciting stuff in the world, but it is the building blocks for understanding government, okay, and our government. Good? Have a great weekend. Enjoy John Stossel tomorrow.
Wait, what?